You are nothing but a stranger who ruined my life. Had things of there. Those were the first words my daughter hurled at me that night. Not Dad. Not even my name. Just a sentence sharp enough to split me in half. I froze in the doorway of my own living room, my hands still holding the car keys, while her voice echoed off the walls like a curse. I wanted to laugh, to pretend she was exaggerating, but the look on her face, steady, cold, trembling with fury, left no space for denial. She meant every word, and in that moment, standing under the dim light of a house that suddenly felt foreign, I realized how far we had drifted. Her name is Emily. To the world, she's a successful young woman, bright and admired. To me, she's the little girl I once carried on my shoulders through county fairs. The child who used to leave notes under my pillow saying, "Love you, Daddy." Somewhere between those days and this night, I had lost her. I sat down at the edge of the couch, my chest burning as if someone had set fire to the years I thought we still had left. The silence between us was louder than any argument we'd ever had. In that silence, I saw every missed dinner, every ignored phone call, every promise postponed until tomorrow. Anyone down. I used to believe time would fix everything, that distance was only temporary. That blood was thicker than resentment, but as she stood there, shaking her head, eyes wet with the kind of pain I could no longer explain away, I understood the truth. Time hadn't healed us. Time had buried us. That night, for the first time, I wasn't a father in her eyes. I was just the man who had failed her. My name is Michael Reed. I turned 54 last winter. I lead a fire crew in a coastal New England city. Most weeks I sleep at the station every other day. A cot, a locker, a radio that never rests. At home there is a porch that creaks, a small backyard with a crooked apple tree, and a table that looks better when Emily is laughing beside it. Our mornings were simple. Coffee in a chipped mug, eggs in a pan. Emily would pad into the kitchen with her sketchbook under her arm, hair still tangled from sleep. She would place the book beside my plate and ask, "Dad, which one do you like? The harbor or the lighthouse?" I would point, kiss the top of her head, and say, "Both." Then my phone would buzz, or the radio from my duty bag would chirp, and the moment would thin. Nora kept the house steady. She taught 3rd grade at the school 3 blocks away. She remembered birthdays and library days. She tucked notes into lunch bags. She also reminded me to be present. Be home for dinner on Fridays if you can. Say yes to small things. She said it softly, never as an order. She knew my work. She also knew our daughter. On good weeks I made pancakes before school. I would flip them and spell her name with blueberries. Emily would roll her eyes and then smile anyway. She loved musicals and documentaries about national parks. On the first warm Saturday of spring, we rode bikes along the river path. She had a nervous way of braking on turns. I would glide near and say, "Loosen your shoulders." She would nod. "Try again." Then lift both hands and cheer when she found balance. I was proud of my work. When a call came, I went. Car wreck at dusk. Kitchen fire in a triple-decker where smoke climbed fast. Ice rescue when a teenager misjudged the pond. There is a rush when the doors of the engine roll up and the world becomes clear. You do the next right thing. Neighbors wave. Local news airs a few seconds of video. The chief shakes your hand. You drive home with ash in your jacket seams and a story you plan to tell at dinner but keep to yourself, because the table does not need it. I told myself I served my city, and that counted for something inside our house. I also told myself I would make up the missed moments. One spring, I promised to be at Emily's choir concert. That afternoon, we caught a warehouse fire. I texted, "I might be late." Nora replied, "She sees your seat." I read the words in the cab, and felt a small stone drop inside me. By the time we rolled hoses and checked the rig, the concert was over. I drove to the school anyway. The custodian held the door and said, "You just missed them, sir." He pointed at a bulletin board where a few programs still hung. I thanked him and walked back to the lot with one folded in my pocket. There were bright days. A picnic where the sky held. A quiz she aced. A painting of the river at dawn that won a ribbon at the fair. I bought a simple frame and hung it with care. For once, I said the right words. "You have an eye for light." She blushed and took a picture for her grandmother. There were also quiet cracks that no one names. Late nights when I came home and found 2 plates in the sink and 1 in the oven with foil on top. Talks I owed that kept getting pushed to later. Emily asking if I could read her essay and then saying, "Forget it," when I looked for my glasses and checked my email first. I thought we had time. Kids bounce, I told myself. Love is resilient. I did not notice how her questions grew shorter. "Are you coming? How long will you be gone? Do you have your bag again?" Nora kept giving me chances to show up. Family picnic next Saturday. Parent-teacher night on Tuesday. She wrote dates on the calendar in the hallway and circled them. I would nod and say, "I will make it work." Sometimes I did. Many times I did not. When I did, I brought the energy of an empty tank. I sat on a metal folding chair, clapped in the right places, smiled for photos, and then drifted toward the door when the room grew loud. If you had asked me then, I would have said we were fine. We had a house that stayed warm. We had a car that started. We had insurance cards in the drawer. Emily had friends who filled our kitchen with laughter. She had a counselor who said college would be within reach. She had a father whose uniform made strangers open doors and nod with respect. That was our ordinary life. Enough brightness to believe we were okay. Enough noise to cover what we were missing. If you had come by for dinner, you would have seen 3 people who knew the steps to a routine. Bless the food. Pass the salad. Ask about homework. Laugh at the small parts of the day that were safe to share. Then the dishes. The trash. The lights. Then my bag by the door again. Then the quiet that felt normal because it had been with us so long. I did not yet understand how often my bag was the 4th person at our table. I remember the first time I saw the shadow fall across Emily's face. She must have been 7. Maybe 8. It was spring. The lilacs by the porch had just opened, and she came running into the kitchen, clutching a crayon drawing of the 2 of us. She had given me a wide smile, her hand holding hers. The sun pouring down in big yellow rays. She was breathless, cheeks flushed, waiting for my reaction. I glanced at it, nodded, and muttered, "That's nice, sweetheart." Then my phone rang. A warehouse alarm downtown. I kissed her head quickly and left. When I returned past midnight, the paper was gone. I found it weeks later crumpled under her bed. Colors faded by dust. It was not a single moment but a string of them, stitched together like beads on a thread. A softball game I promised to watch. But the crew was called to a car crash. A science fair where her model of a windmill turned slowly under a desk fan. But my seat stayed empty. The way her eyes searched the bleachers. The way she waved even when she knew I was not there. Each time I said I was sorry. Each time she said it was okay. But children's forgiveness hides bruises you cannot see until years later. Nora noticed. She would fold her arms and whisper, "She needs you to be more than a photograph in uniform." I would argue that duty came first, that I saved lives, that she would understand one day. In truth, I wanted to believe that medals and plaques could replace bedtime stories. By the time Emily turned 10, she had stopped showing me her drawings. She still made them scenes of rivers, city skylines, portraits of classmates, but she left them on her desk, never on the kitchen table. When I asked how school was, she would answer with one word, fine. When I tried to sit beside her, she would slide her notebook closed. The space between us grew inch by inch, silent and unannounced. There were nights when I came home late and found her asleep on the couch, book open on her chest. I would carry her to bed and whisper, "I'm proud of you." She never heard it. The words hung in the air of her darkened room, unanswered. The first sharp wound came the evening of her 11th birthday. We had planned a small party. Nora baked a cake, strung lights in the backyard, invited 3 of Emily's closest friends. I told her I would be there. But halfway through the day, a call came. An apartment blaze, smoke billowing into the afternoon sky. We fought the fire until dusk. I arrived home with soot in my hair, my boots muddy. The yard was empty. The lights sagged in the wind. Inside, plates stacked on the counter, frosting smeared, candles stubbed out. Emily was in her room. I knocked softly, whispered happy birthday, and pushed a wrapped box onto her desk. She didn't look at me. She just said, "You missed it." And that was all. That night, I lay awake beside Nora, listening to the creak of the house. I told myself she was young, that children forget disappointments quickly, but I could not forget the sound of her voice, flat and heavy, like she had stopped expecting me to be there. The wounds of childhood are not dramatic. They are subtle. A father absent from the stands, a voice absent at bedtime, a seat empty at the table. These absences pile up like ash after a fire light enough to ignore until you realize it covers everything. Looking back now, those were the years when Emily began building walls I could not see. I thought I was protecting the city. I did not realize I was leaving my own daughter unprotected from the ache of neglect. The first time Emily said the word artist with a straight back and bright eyes. She was 12. We were driving past the harbor at dusk. Boats were black shapes against pink water. She said she wanted to draw light for the rest of her life. I smiled and said that sounded nice. Then I added the sentence that turned her joy into caution. "You should keep your grades strong in math. Real jobs need numbers." She looked out the window and nodded. That winter, her art teacher sent a note home. "Emily has a chance to attend the State Arts Weekend in Boston. Portfolio reviews. Workshops with real painters. Parents must attend an orientation on Saturday morning." I marked the date. I promised I would be there. Before sunrise, the radio cracked with a call. Smoke in an assisted living building. Elderly residents. Possibly entrapment. I stared at the calendar, then at my boots, then at Nora, who was already holding my jacket. "Go," she said softly. We worked for hours. The sun was high when we rolled hose. I checked my phone with shaking hands. 4 missed calls from Nora. 1 message from Emily. They gave my slot away. On the way, I rehearsed a promise to make it right. I stopped at an art store and bought a heavy sketchbook and charcoal sticks wrapped in paper. I pictured us in Boston another weekend, laughing in line, meeting a painter who would notice her. I drove to the school. The lot was empty. A caretaker swept salt from the steps. He said they had left at noon. Spots went to the wait list. At home, Emily sat at the table with her sketchbook closed. I told her I would call someone. She said it was not a big deal. She said it so gently that I wanted to beg her to scream. She sketched at night after that. She turned the lamp low and worked in the quiet. One evening I tapped on her door and asked to see. She passed me 3 pages. A snow-covered dock. A portrait of our neighbor with tea steam rising from his cup. A self-portrait with careful eyes. I should have said these were beautiful. Instead, I said what I thought would keep her safe. Art is a wonderful hobby. You should think about a career that can hold you when life gets heavy. In spring, she found a summer program at a museum school in Providence. Tuition was covered if a parent arranged the interview. The deadline sat on a flyer near the fruit bowl. I kept meaning to call. On the last morning, a warehouse exploded by the river. We were there, past dark. I drove home with a hollow head. The flyer was damp at the edge, and the deadline had passed. 2 days later, she asked to ride the bus to a public portfolio day. I told her no. I said it was not safe. I said the city could turn on a girl who looked unsure. She held up a map with circles on it. She said she could text me at every stop. I told her my answer was final. She went upstairs and closed her door. The sound was small but final. Nora placed 3 canvases on the dining table and asked if I could sit with them. Storm light over the bay. A street at night with a single window bright and warm. Hands folded around a book. The colors were confident and tender. I stood there too long without speaking. When I finally did, I asked about scholarships and employment. I asked what the plan would be if the art did not sell. Emily gathered the canvases and slid them under her bed. Paintbrushes soaked in the sink. By morning, the sink was clean, and the easel stood bare. The last blow came in the fall of her sophomore year. The school announced a partnership with a regional art institute. Emily was shortlisted for an interview. The time conflicted with a ceremony at our station for a medal I had earned. I asked if she could reschedule. She said the institute chose the times. The chief made a speech. Cameras took pictures. The medal was pinned to my coat. I left as soon as I could and drove across town in traffic. I reached the studio 7 minutes after the hour. A guard checked the list and shook his head. I walked back to the street with the medal in my pocket. At home, her light was on, but the blinds were drawn. On her desk lay a stack of sketches torn clean down the middle. The knife on the mat was still open. I gathered the halves and found a face I knew at once. It was my face drawn in charcoal. The eyes looking away. I told her to keep going. I said we could find another path. She said there was no point. She said she had learned the lesson I kept teaching without knowing. Dreams are fragile. They do not belong in a house where time always runs out. She was 15 that day. Her voice sounded older. Years later, when I think about the word crushed, I do not see shouting or broken doors. I see a calendar with the wrong boxes filled. I see a bus schedule folded in a pocket that never reached a station. I see the look on my daughter's face when a door closed before we arrived. I see myself holding a medal that meant less than a chair I should have kept warm in a room where her future waited. I told myself I was protecting her. I told myself I was teaching her to be realistic. In truth, I was teaching her to stop asking me to show up. She learned that lesson very well. High school changed our house in ways I did not expect. Emily started waking before dawn and drawing in the kitchen while the kettle hissed. The sketches were quick and clean. Buildings, faces, hands at rest. She moved quietly, like a guest who did not want to disturb anyone. I would step in, make coffee, and try to talk. She would answer with a nod and a small smile. Then she would slip her headphones on and vanish into her work. After the winter break, she asked for more space. She wanted to study at the library after school. She wanted to take the late bus. She wanted Saturdays to herself. I said yes. Then added rules like weights on a string. Be home by 9. Share your location. Answer when I call. She agreed to most of it. But I could feel the mood change. The air in the house grew careful. Words were measured. Doors closed gently, but often. She joined a student group that painted murals around the city. She told me the theme was places that hold memory. I promised I would come to the unveiling of the first wall. The call came the same afternoon. A roof fire near the shipyard. I sent a text that I would be late. I reached the site during cleanup. The street was empty. The colors on the wall glowed in the evening light. She had painted a diner booth with 2 mugs of coffee and a napkin with a heart drawn in blue pen. It was tender and a little sad. I stood there alone and felt like an intruder. At home, she said it went fine. Then she went upstairs. Later, I saw a small paint smear on her wrist. I wanted to touch her hand and say I was proud. I wiped the smear away with a dish towel instead. By spring, Emily had found a job at a cafe by the river. She said she liked the pace and the way regulars came at the same time each day. She learned names and favorite orders. She liked the way the light hit the glass case in the morning. I did not ask many questions. I only worried about late hours and parking lots. I offered rides that she rarely accepted. She said Kayla could drop her off. She said she would be careful. I believed her, and also did not. Nora watched us from across the room. She tried to help. She put a bowl of clementines on the table and a stack of clean napkins. She scheduled a day trip to the art museum and left the passes on the counter. I took a call that morning and did not make it back in time. Nora and Emily went without me. They returned with a quiet energy I could not join. There were small fights that did not look like fights. I would remind her about curfew. She would remind me that I was gone 3 nights a week. I would ask about homework. She would ask if I wanted to see her sketch. I would say later and then forget. She would say, never mind. We both walked away, feeling misunderstood. One night she was late and did not pick up her phone. I drove the route from the cafe to our house and imagined every wrong turn. When she walked in at 9:20, smiling, with a paper bag of day-old pastries, I was not relieved. I was angry. I spoke too loudly. I said she did not respect the house. She stared at me in shock. She set the bag on the counter without a word and went to her room. In the morning, the bag was in the trash. I reached in with clean hands and took a croissant out and tried a bite. It tasted like sugar and cardboard. I threw it away and sat at the table and hated myself for the way I had met her joy. There were new names on her phone. Teachers, a manager, a local painter who mentored students on Sundays in a church basement. She asked to go. I said yes, but insisted on driving. She sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window. I told her I was happy she had found people who cared about the same things. She said thanks. She did not look at me. The mentor shook my hand and thanked me for bringing her. He spoke about line and patience and the way light makes a street feel honest. When I came back 2 hours later, she was smiling in a way I had not seen in months. I wanted to join it. I could not. The distance showed itself in pictures. Emily posted a photo of a group at a wall covered in sketches. Her face was half hidden behind a cap. Nora liked the photo. I scrolled and stopped at an older picture of the 3 of us on a beach with wind in our hair. I could not remember the last time I stood that close to my daughter without her leaning away. College talk arrived like a season. Flyers came in the mail. Counselors sent emails. The walls of the school filled with dates. Emily wanted city schools with strong studio programs. I wanted the state college an hour away. We did not fight in the loud way. We looked at the same map and spoke in careful tones. She said she needed a place to grow. I said she could grow near home. She asked if I trusted her. I said, of course. She asked if I trusted the world. I said, not really. She nodded like she expected that answer. In late summer, she sold her first print at a small market by the wharf. I had a shift but told the chief I would take my lunch by the pier. I reached the tents as the wind picked up. A vendor helped her clip the corners of her display so the boards would not fall. I stood back and watched a woman hand Emily $10 and tuck the print under her arm. Emily grinned. She looked for someone to share the moment with and found Kayla. I stepped forward then, but the radio on my belt barked. I answered and moved toward the truck. I glanced back and she was laughing with her friend. I left the pier with the taste of salt and failure in my mouth. At home, I tried again. I asked if she would show me the piece she sold. She handed me a second copy without a word. It was a narrow street at dusk, with a single figure walking away. The windows were lit. The sky was soft. The space between buildings felt like a held breath. I told her it was good. She said thank you in a neutral voice and went upstairs. I stood in the hallway and stared at the closed door. I felt like a guest in my own house. By the start of senior year, we had a way of speaking that kept us from bleeding. We traded schedules and weather reports. We confirmed pickups and grocery lists. We avoided birthdays that were not on calendars. Nora tried to pull us closer. She made Sunday dinners and put candles on the table. We ate and smiled and did not say what mattered. After dishes, Emily would slip out to meet friends. I would put my bag by the door and sit on the porch until the station called. On the night everything finally broke. I thought we were stable. We were not. We were two people who had learned how to pass each other in a hallway without brushing shoulders. We were careful and polite. We were quiet. The distance felt normal because it had grown with us. I did not yet see how one more small failure could turn silence into a wall. The breaking point did not come with shouting. It came with a sentence spoken in a voice steady enough to slice through the air. It was late autumn of her senior year. The leaves along the street had turned brittle, crunching under tires as I pulled into the driveway. Emily was at the kitchen table, papers scattered, her sketchbook half open. She looked up as I set my bag down. Her eyes were red, not from tears, but from exhaustion. She took a deep breath and said, "I can't pretend anymore." I tried to smile, to soften the tension. Pretend what? Sweetheart? She stared at me as if I were a stranger. Pretend that we have a real relationship. Pretend that you care about me as your daughter and not as some problem to solve. The words struck like a blow. I opened my mouth to protest, but she kept going, her voice calm, her hands trembling on the paper. You show up in uniform. You sit at the table. You ask about grades, but you don't see me. You've never seen me. Not when I was painting, not when I begged you to come to that interview, not when I told you what I wanted to be. You only see what you wish I was. I said her name, trying to reach her, but she cut me off. Don't say it like it means something. You lost that right years ago. I stepped back, the weight of her words pressing me against the counter. I wanted to say I had tried, that I had worked to give her a safe home, that my absences were for a purpose, but all of that sounded hollow. Excuses I had repeated until they turned to dust. She stood, gathered her sketches, and pressed them into a folder. Her voice lowered, almost to a whisper. You're just a firefighter to me, not a father. A uniform that shows up when alarms go off, not when I need someone to sit beside me. The insult was complete not because of the sharpness, but because of the truth inside it. I had built a life where strangers called me a hero. My own daughter saw only an empty chair. Nora came in from the hallway, eyes wide, hearing enough to know we had crossed into new territory. She tried to speak, but Emily brushed past her. The folder clutched to her chest. The front door slammed, the sound echoing through the house like a verdict. I stood in the silence that followed, unable to move. My hands shook as if I had just come from a fire. Adrenaline burning through me with nowhere to go. I wanted to run after her, to beg her to take the words back. But the house was still. The only thing left was the hollow ache of knowing my daughter had said aloud what I had feared for years. That night, I sat in her empty room. The desk was neat, the walls covered in faded sketches, tacked with tape. I touched one gently, a drawing of the two of us on a bench. My arm around her shoulders. The lines were uneven, the colors smudged, but the hope in her younger eyes was clear. I realized that picture was a memory she had been waiting for me to make real. I never had. When she returned hours later, I heard her steps upstairs. I stayed in my chair and whispered to the walls. I'm sorry. She never heard me. The breaking point had come. And from that night on, our silence was no longer temporary. It was permanent. A wall too tall to climb with promises. The call came on a gray Tuesday. Dispatch named the elementary school 3 blocks from our house. Medical emergency. Possible collapse. I was halfway through a drill when the address hit me. Nora's school. We took the back entrance by the playground. A custodian waved us down the hall. 3rd room on the left. I went in first. Nora lay on the floor beside a ring of tiny desks. Her colleague knelt near her. Pale. Phone in hand. She said the words that bend time. She said she just fell. We checked pulse and pupils. We set oxygen. We counted breaths. The room smelled like dry erase and old paper. I spoke to Nora as if she could hear me. Stay with me. I am here. Her eyes fluttered once. Then stilled. We moved fast. The medic called for transport. I rode in the back and watched the green line run across the monitor like a narrow hope. At the hospital they said the word I feared. Aneurysm. They said it gently. Like a plate set on a table that will break anyway. Emily arrived with paint on her knuckles. Someone from the office had called her. She saw my face and stepped back like she had hit a wall. She asked where her mother was. I pointed. Her eyes searched mine for a promise I could not give. Hours passed in a slow blur. Nurses moved. Doors opened and closed. The surgeon came out with the kind of news that lives in a family forever. He spoke in clear words. The bleed was massive. The damage severe. They had done everything they could. I thanked him because that is what people do when they receive the worst thing they will ever hear. Emily sat with her hands folded on her knees. She did not cry at first. She stared at the clock, and then at the floor. Tile pattern. When the tears came, they came without sound. I wanted to hold her. I did not. She did not lean toward me. We signed forms. We walked into a room where machines hummed softly, and Nora's face looked calm in a way that did not feel like sleep. I touched her hair and told her I had loved her from the first day I saw her. Emily stood on the other side of the bed with her jaw set, as if grief itself would not let her fall. The next days moved like a river after rain. People left food. A neighbor shoveled our walk. The department sent a wreath that dwarfed the door. The church set a date and asked for photos. I found boxes in the closet. Emily chose a picture of Nora holding her as a baby. Sunlight on both faces. I chose a portrait from the year we married. We did not argue. We did not say much. We moved in parallel lines that did not touch. At the service, the room filled until the aisles were crowded. Teachers told stories about Nora's patience with a child who could not sit still. Parents spoke about notes she wrote that felt like small blessings. The chief asked me to speak. I told them Nora loved small things. The way a child sounded out a hard word. The way the first snow looked on the schoolyard. The way Emily laughed when she was little. My voice broke on her name. The room was quiet in a way that felt like shelter. Afterward, I shook so many hands that my fingers went numb. People called me strong. They said the city stood with us. Emily stayed near the back with her friends. When I reached her, she gave me a careful embrace that lasted 2 seconds. I wanted to weep on her shoulder. I kept my back straight and thanked another person for coming. The house was hardest at night, her sweater on the chair, her book on the nightstand with a slip of paper marking a page, the tea mug by the sink with a brown ring at the bottom. I did laundry and found a note in a pocket that said, "Remember to pick up clementines." I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the room tilt. Everything I had not said to Nora filled the air and had nowhere to land. Emily took charge before I knew how to move. She called the bank. She met the human resources officer at the school. She emailed relatives. She made a list and crossed items off with neat lines. I watched her and felt both grateful and ashamed. She had learned early how to take care of herself. Now she took care of me too. Not with warmth, but with a firm quiet. People said I should go back to the station to keep my mind busy. I tried. I stood by the rig and checked equipment like it could answer the ache. Calls came, And we went. I moved through scenes as if underwater. At night I returned to a house that had lost its center. Emily's door stayed closed. When we spoke, it was about paperwork and meals. When we did not speak, the silence sounded like an old clock no one had wound. The tragedy did what tragedy often does. It stripped the room of everything that was not necessary. What remained was the truth. I had not been there in the ways I should when we still had time. Now there was no more time to earn back. And still, the distance between Emily and me stood where it had always been. I thought grief might pull us together. Instead, it placed our losses side by side like two chairs, set a little too far apart. We were in the same house and on different islands. I could see her across the water. I did not know how to build a bridge. The weeks after the funeral blurred into months, but the emptiness stayed sharp. I kept expecting to hear Nora humming in the kitchen or calling me from the porch. Instead, the house echoed with nothing. I moved through the rooms like a tenant, careful not to touch what still smelled of her. The bed stayed half-made, her pillow untouched. I sat in the living room at night with the lamp on and the television muted, staring at shadows until dawn. Emily filled the silence with her own kind. She spent hours at school or at work, coming home late, her footsteps soft on the stairs. Sometimes she left sketches on the table, half-finished cityscapes, portraits with faces turned away. I would glance at them and feel a pang, but I rarely said anything. Words felt dangerous, like they might push her farther, so I said nothing. That silence became my cage. Regret does not arrive all at once. It seeps. I began remembering moments I had dismissed. Her voice when she was small asking me to read. Her look the day I missed her birthday. The paint on her wrist after the mural unveiling. The empty chair beside her at the concert. They came back in flashes so vivid that I would grip the table until my knuckles whitened. I wished I had shouted less about curfew and listened more about her art. I wished I had put down my bag and picked up her sketchbook. But wishing is a cruel game. The past only echoes back its refusal. At the station, men clapped my shoulder and told me to stay strong. Calls came and went, and I worked like a machine. Flames roared. Alarms blared. And still my head filled with images of the house at night. Emily behind a closed door. Me alone in the hall. After one fire, I sat in the truck staring at my reflection in the window. The soot on my face looked like cracks in stone. I thought of Nora's last words to me. Take care of our girl, and realized I had failed before I even began. One evening, Emily came home with friends. They laughed in the driveway, arms full of canvases. For a moment I saw her as she must be when I am not there. Alive, engaged, shining. When she stepped inside and saw me in the chair, her laughter dimmed. She carried her work upstairs without a word. I sat with the sound of her fading steps and felt the distance grow wider. I began writing letters I never gave her. Pages filled with apologies, confessions, promises. I wrote about the firehouse, about the nights I stayed instead of coming home, about how I mistook service for love. I told her I had crushed her dreams without knowing and that I saw it now. Too late. Each letter ended the same. I am sorry. I left the pages in a drawer, afraid to hand them over, afraid she would rip them apart. Or worse, ignore them. Loneliness made me desperate for routine. I cooked meals no one ate. I shoveled snow from both our cars, even though she had already left. I fixed a leaking faucet and waited for her to notice. She didn't. She lived parallel, and I let her. My regret grew heavier until it felt like another person in the room, breathing over my shoulder, whispering all the chances I had lost. I thought of Nora constantly. I thought of the promise she had asked of me with her last breath. Take care of our girl. I whispered it back into the dark and hated myself for failing. Nights stretched long. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the back door. I half expected Nora to walk in, to tell me to stop wasting time, to push me toward Emily's room. Instead, there was only the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my daughter moving farther from me with each passing day. The loneliness was not just the absence of my wife. It was the absence of the bond I had with my daughter, a bond I had never truly built. Regret sharpened it. Every memory became a wound. I was not only grieving the woman I lost, I was grieving the father I never was. I decided to stop waiting for a perfect moment. There is no perfect moment after a funeral. There is only a door you open and a step you take. I wrote a note on a postcard and slid it under Emily's door. Dinner at the diner by the pier. 7. My treat. No talk about curfew. Just you and me. She came. She sat across from me in a red booth that still smelled like syrup and coffee. The waitress knew Nora by name and brought us water without asking. Emily kept her coat on. I asked about school. She said fine. I asked about work. She said it was busy. I told her I was proud of her for keeping everything together. She nodded and looked out the window. I panicked at the quiet and reached for something safe. I mentioned the state college again. She could live at home for a year and save money. I said it gently. The air changed. She set her fork down and asked why I always turned what she loved into a plan I could manage. I said I only wanted her to be secure. She said security felt like a cage when it came from fear. She paid for her pie with cash and left the change under the glass. She stood. Thank you for dinner. She walked out into the cold before I could stop her. I stayed and watched her cross the lot under a yellow light and felt very old. I tried again a week later. I brought flowers to the cafe on the morning of Nora's birthday. I wanted to honor her and also to show Emily. I remembered the date that mattered. The line was long. I stood with the bouquet and smiled at customers who glanced at me and then at her. When she saw me, her face tightened. I asked to speak with her on her break. She shook her head. Not now. I said it would only take a minute. Her manager looked at the flowers and then at her and stepped away. Emily met me by the back door with her apron still on. She said this was her job. She said I had made a moment about me in front of everyone. I said I was trying to be present. She said presence does not mean performance. She went back inside and did not look at me again. I left the flowers in a plastic bucket by a mop sink and felt the heat of shame in my face. I reached out to her mentor next. His name was Rafael Alvarez. He taught on Sundays in the church basement and spoke with a calm that steadied the room. I asked if he could review Emily's portfolio. He said yes, but only if she wanted it. I told him I would bring her. He said, do not surprise a young artist with a plan. Ask first. I said I understood. I did not listen. On Sunday, I drove her to the church and said we were just stopping by. She stepped inside, saw the tables, and turned on me with a look I will never forget. You set this up without asking me. She backed toward the door. Alvarez lifted a hand and said he would be happy to meet another time. She left, and the door closed softly. I stood in a room that smelled like coffee and paper and felt like a thief. 2 days later, I did the worst thing. I went to Nora's school and asked the principal about a mural for the courtyard. A memorial. Something bright for the children. I had seen a sketch in a folder under Emily's bed. A storybook tree with small hands hidden in the leaves. It looked like hope. The principal loved the idea. She said the district would help. She asked for a sample image to include in the proposal. I did not think twice. I took a photo of the sketch with my phone and sent it. Emily found out when the principal emailed her to ask if she would like to lead the project. She came home early and walked into the kitchen with the phone in her hand. Her face was white. Her voice shook. You showed them my drawing. You went through my things and took something that was mine. I said I only wanted to honor her mother. I said the city would love it. She stared at me as if I had spoken another language. That drawing was a private study. It was unfinished. It was not yours to offer. She took a breath that sounded like it hurt. And then she said the sentence that lifted every hair on my skin. You are not fixing anything. You are branding your guilt on my work. I reached for her, but she stepped back. She told me to stop calling Mr. Alvarez. She told me to stop showing up at the cafe. She told me to call the principal and withdraw. I said the school had already announced the proposal to staff. She closed her eyes. She said, of course they had. That is what happens when you take without asking. I called the principal that night and said the artist was not available. She was kind. She said there would be other ways to remember Nora. I hung up and sat at the table and pressed my palms to my eyes. Emily packed a small bag the next day. She said she was staying with Kayla for a while. She did not slam doors. She moved with care, as if loud noise might shatter what little remained. At the threshold she paused. She said she was tired. She said she needed space that did not smell like grief and plans. I asked if I could help carry her bag. She said, no. She walked to the curb and got into a car. She did not look back. The house grew quieter in 10 minutes than it had in months. I went to her room and found the bed made. The desk clear. A single paper on the chair. It was a list of errands for the week. Bank. Oil change. Groceries. On the back she had written a sentence in small letters. Please stop trying to manage me. Learn to love me instead. I sat on the floor and read it again and again until the words blurred. I called her twice that night and did not leave messages. I wrote a few lines and stared at them and tore the page. I walked the hallway and touched the walls and asked the air what to do. The truth was simple. My attempts to reconnect had been attempts to control. I had tried to steer her toward the safer shore. She wanted me to meet her where she stood and see her as she was. I had failed again. Only this time the failure had a clear boundary around it. I slept on the couch with the porch light on. At dawn, I turned it off. The house looked like a stage after the audience had gone home. Chairs pushed in, plates stacked. A room that knew the story but could not tell me how to change the ending. I stood there and understood at last that the next move could not be a plan, a visit, or a meeting. It had to be something smaller and harder. It had to be surrender. I spent weeks circling around the same thought. I had said too much and also never enough. Every attempt to speak with Emily became tangled in my own need to fix, to control, to explain. Words in the air twisted into weapons. So I chose the page. It was a Sunday morning. The station bell rang for a small kitchen fire. But my name wasn't on the roster. I stayed home, sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, and stared at the lines until my hand began to move. Emily, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect an answer. I only need you to know that I see it now, the years I stole, the dreams I crushed, the silence I left you in. Reckon go 10. I paused, the pen trembling. The house was so quiet I could hear the tick of the old wall clock. I thought of Nora's last words. Take care of our girl. I wrote them down too. Then I admitted the truth I had never spoken aloud. I failed your mother by failing you. I thought providing and protecting would be enough. I thought medals and long shifts could stand in for presents. I was wrong. I am ashamed of the father I was. And no there. The pages filled quickly. Memories spilled out. Her crayon drawing of us at the harbor. The mural I missed. The birthday I ruined. The sketch I stole. I wrote the sentences I had wanted to say in those moments. That's beautiful. I am proud of you. I am here. Words she should have grown up hearing. Words I saved too long. I told her about the nights I sat in her room when she was gone. touching the edges of her sketches. I told her I admired her courage to keep creating when I gave her no encouragement. I told her she was stronger than me, because she never stopped trying to be herself. The last lines came slowly. If you ever want to meet, I'll be here. Not as a firefighter. Not as a man who thinks he knows better. Just as your father, hoping for another chance. But if you never come, I will still be here, loving you as you are. You owe me nothing. Ovary. I signed my name with a hand that shook and folded the pages into an envelope. I walked 3 blocks to Kayla's house, where I knew Emily was staying, and slipped it into the mailbox. I did not knock. I did not wait. I turned and walked home under a sky that felt too bright for what I had just done. That night I did not sleep. I lay on the couch and watched the dark turn to gray. Every sound outside, every passing car, every footstep made me think she might come. She did not. 2 days passed, then 3. A week. No call. No visit. No message. I told myself she had thrown the letter away. I told myself I had written it for me, not for her. That the act itself was the point. Still, each evening, I found myself at the window when the porch light clicked on, hoping to see her shape in the glow. On the 10th day, the doorbell rang. I opened it and found not Emily, but Kayla. She held the letter, creased from rereading. Her eyes were kind. She got it, she said. She's thinking. Don't push. Just let her be. I met her the fine. The be, I can't-y. It is roving my. I word. I nodded, throat too tight for words. When she left, I sat on the steps with the cold seeping through my jeans. For the first time in months, I felt something shift, not healed, not restored, but cracked open. The letter had traveled farther than my voice ever could. Maybe this was the turning point. Not a reunion. Not forgiveness. Just a door no longer locked. A chance that someday she might walk through. 2 weeks after I mailed the letter, the principal from Nora's school called. The 3rd graders were building a reading corner in the library. Pillows. A paper tree. A low shelf for picture books. Could I come on Saturday and help lift and fix things? I said yes. I arrived early with a box of screws and a roll of blue tape. The library smelled like paper and paste. A dozen kids sat with a new teacher named Ms. Patel. I knelt and showed them my palms. We are building a place where stories can sit and wait for you. We measured and pushed shelves. We taped a rectangle for a rug. A boy named Theo dropped a jar of green paint and froze. The puddle spread toward a stack of books. I slid in with a towel, scooped the worst of it, and said words I wish someone had said to my daughter at his age. Accidents happen. We clean them. We keep going. Theo exhaled and smiled without shame. Near mid-morning, the doors opened and Emily walked in with a tote of brushes. Kayla followed with rolls of paper. Emily wore a cap low on her forehead. She did not look at me. Ms. Patel clapped and said the artist was here. Children gathered around her in a small storm of questions. She bent to their height with a steady patience I recognized from Nora. She told them they would make leaves from painted hands. She said every leaf would hold a word that felt like a friend. I stepped back. I carried boxes and filled water cups. I said nothing. Emily directed the room the way a calm person guides a boat into a narrow slip. She drew a long brown trunk. A little girl named Ava pressed her orange-painted hand beside it and whispered, "For Mrs. Reed." The room went quiet for a beat. Emily nodded and whispered, "Thank you, sweetheart." Ms. Patel asked if someone could tape the highest branches. I moved to the ladder and held it in place. Emily climbed with strips of paper between her fingers. The ladder shivered. I planted my feet and said quietly, "I have you." Her shoulders eased. She pressed the branches into place and came back to the floor. During lunch, a boy handed me a paperback with a fox on the cover. He said, "Mrs. Reed used to read this. Would I read one chapter?" My voice failed at the first page, and then found a path. The children leaned in. When I finished, Ava reached into her pocket and handed me a clementine. Her mother had told her Mrs. Reed always kept them in the desk. The peel came off in one piece. The scent filled the air like a small bell. Emily watched from across the room. Her eyes were wet, but she did not look away. Afternoon lights softened the room. The paper tree grew full. Children wrote words on their leaves. Brave, gentle, listen, share. When it came time for a small note near the trunk, Ms. Patel held out a pen and asked Emily to write the line. Emily thought for a long moment. Then she printed slowly. For Nora Reed, who taught us to love small things. I did not add a word. Before they left, the kids gathered in front of the tree for a picture. Ms. Patel waved me in. I shook my head. Kayla looked at Emily. Emily walked over, took my sleeve, and said, "Please." Her voice was soft. We stood on the edge together, not touching, but not apart. The camera clicked. A boy told the firefighter to smile. I did. Cleanup went fast. She squeezed my arm and said, "Good work today." When I turned back, Emily stood by the window. Palms stained orange and gold. "Thank you for coming," I said. She nodded. She said she read the letter. She said some parts hurt, but they felt true. She said she did not know what to do with them yet. I said there was no hurry. I would wait. We walked out into the mild afternoon. The swing chains clicked. At the edge of the lot, a small wooden footbridge crosses a shallow ditch. Children call it the river. Emily paused on it. She took the clementine from her pocket, split it, and handed me half. We ate in silence. We stood there like two people who had lost the same person and finally knew it. On the far field, a child chased a kite, fell, and began to laugh. Emily laughed once, short and surprised, as if she had not heard her own laugh in a long while. She tucked her hair under the cap and said she might come by the house next week to pick up some of Nora's books. I said they would be on the table. She nodded. She started to walk away, then turned back and spoke without anger. "Please do not talk to my mentors without asking me first." I promised I would not. She said thank you and headed toward the parking lot. I stayed on the bridge and watched the water that was not a river move under me. The day held steady. Children had done what grief could not. A small hand had pressed orange paint against paper and said a name aloud. A clementine had been shared. It was not forgiveness. It was not a return. It was a plank placed over water. It was enough to cross once. When I got home, I put the peel on a small dish by the sink. The scent stayed till morning. I left it there as a promise. I would keep the ladder steady. I would clean the spill. I would stay near without taking. The bridge was narrow, but it could hold us if I learned how to walk it. The week after the library project, the house felt different. It was not loud or full. It was not warm the way it had been when Nora was alive. But it was no longer hollow. A trace of paint still clung to my hands, and the smell of paper leaves lingered in my coat. I found myself listening for footsteps again, not with dread, but with hope. On Tuesday evening, Emily came by. She did not call first. She walked in with a tote bag and said she was here for some of Nora's books. I pointed to the stack I had set on the dining table. Spines Nate. Dust wiped away. She picked them up one by one, ran her hand over the covers, and smiled at titles she had once heard in bedtime stories. I stayed quiet, let her move at her own pace. When she sat down with the books in her lap, I asked if she wanted tea. She nodded. I set the kettle. careful not to crowd her, careful not to force a conversation. When I handed her the cup, she said, "Thank you," in a tone that was not distant. It was small, almost ordinary. My chest tightened at the sound. We sat across from each other, sipping. At first we spoke of practical things, her work schedule, a professor who encouraged her to apply for an art residency, the rent she was splitting with Kayla. Then the words slowed. She tapped the cover of a children's book and said, "Mom used to make voices for every animal." I laughed softly and told her how ridiculous those voices had sounded to me at first, until I realized they made her glow. Emily smiled, and for a moment the wall between us cracked. Over the next weeks, she came back. Sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to pick up another box. Each time she stayed longer. I stopped preparing speeches and started listening. When she spoke about her sketches, I asked questions instead of offering plans. When she mentioned money, I offered to help but let her decide. The shift was small but real. I was no longer managing. I was learning to stay beside her. One Saturday morning, she arrived with a canvas under her arm. She said she needed better light to finish it. She sat up by the kitchen window. Brushes in a jar of water. Colors spread across the table where family meals once sat. I made coffee and watched from a distance as she painted. The street outside was gray, but the canvas filled with yellow light. I did not ask what it meant. I only said, "It's beautiful." She looked at me for a long moment, then returned to her work without closing the sketchbook as she had in years past. Slow reconciliation is not a movie scene. It is not tears and sudden forgiveness. It is a plate washed together. It is a walk down the block where silence is not sharp but gentle. It is the way she left her brushes on the counter one evening and came back the next day to find them clean, bristles soft, standing in a jar. She touched them and gave me a nod that felt like a gift. There were setbacks too. One night I asked too quickly about her deadlines, and she snapped that I was turning into a manager again. I caught myself, apologized at once, and stepped back. She did not storm out. She stayed. And later we shared a late meal in quiet. That night I realized reconciliation is not about never failing again. It is about failing less. Admitting sooner. Choosing love over pride. When spring came, we planted herbs in the yard together. Basil, thyme, mint. Nora had always wanted a small garden but never had the time. Emily pressed seeds into the soil with careful fingers. She said the earth smelled like memory. I knelt beside her, not as a guide, not as a teacher, but simply as her father, sharing the weight of the dirt and the warmth of the sun. I still wrote letters, though fewer now, not because I could not speak, but because I liked leaving pieces of myself she could find later. One morning she found a note tucked into a book she had taken. It said only, "I am proud of you today." She texted me a single-word reply. "Thanks." It was enough. The distance had not disappeared. Some nights she still stayed away. Some mornings she left without saying goodbye. But there was a thread again, thin but strong, pulling us toward each other. A bridge that no longer swayed in every wind. I learned to walk it with patience. She learned to trust that I would not step off. Slow reconciliation is not loud. It is the sound of a kettle, the brush of paint on canvas, the rustle of pages. It is the feeling of sharing half a clementine on a wooden bridge and knowing you are no longer alone. Summer came warm and steady. The garden behind the house filled with green, small herbs reaching toward the fence line. Emily visited more often. Not every day. Not with ceremony. But enough that her shoes left new tracks on the porch. Sometimes she painted by the window. Sometimes she read at the table. Sometimes she said nothing at all. Those silences no longer frightened me. They felt like rest. One evening we sat outside with bowls of fruit. The air smelled of salt from the harbor. Fireflies blinked above the grass. Emily peeled an orange and handed me half without a word. I remembered the Clementine from months ago. The bridge. The way her laugh had returned in a single burst. I wanted to speak a lesson, but I stopped myself. Instead, I listened. She told me about a commission from a local gallery, about her nervousness and excitement. I said only, "I'll be there." This time, I meant it, and she knew it. The night of the gallery opening, I stood in the crowd, not in uniform, not with medals, but in an old jacket that smelled of cedar. People walked past her paintings and whispered about light and perspective. I watched Emily from across the room as she explained her process. Her face shone in a way I had nearly forgotten. When she caught me watching, she gave a small nod. It was not a reconciliation sealed forever, but it was trust. Rebuilt, one glance at a time. Later, at home, I sat with the quiet and thought of Nora. I thought of her last request. Take care of our girl. For so long, I believed that meant protecting, providing, planning. I had been wrong. Taking care meant seeing, listening, waiting. It meant standing steady while she chose her own path. It meant loving without condition. The final lesson came not in a dramatic moment, but in the ordinary. It was Sunday morning. Emily brewed coffee while I sliced bread. We moved around the kitchen without bumping shoulders. She asked if I remembered how Mom used to hum while washing dishes. I said yes. She smiled faintly, and then she began to hum the same tune. I joined her. Off-key. Clumsy. But present. For the first time in years, the house sounded like a home again. I know I cannot rewrite the past. The missed birthdays. The broken promises. The words left unsaid. But I have learned that regret is not the end of the story. It is the soil from which change can grow. If tended with honesty and patience. If someone asked me now what I want most, I would not say medals, or praise, or even forgiveness. I would say, time to sit with my daughter while she paints. Time to hear her laughter drift down the hallway. Time to show her, in every small act, that she is loved exactly as she is. That is the final lesson. Love is not a project. It is not a performance. It is not a plan. It is the quiet choice, made again and again, to stay.